Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. I tell you, every time I get behind this microphone, I'm so excited to bring you this episode today. We are recording this episode in December of 2022. We, my friends, are live. We are on YouTube, and so if you would rather switch over to YouTube, that link is in the show notes. But I have both Tammy and Jeff here with me, looking at me as I'm introducing them to the podcast. But we are here today to have an unfiltered conversation about forgiveness. And we're going to talk to Tammy and Jeff, and they are going to share with us how they are finding their way through a very difficult situation, and a situation that lots of people, lots of married couples find themselves in this world and in this country alone. As you know, guys, we are on a series in forgiveness. And we're talking about how do we forgive? How do we forgive even when it doesn't seem fair? How do we forgive when we don't want to? How do we forgive when there's still anger? How do we do that? And so all season long, we are bringing people on, telling stories about how they walk through forgiveness, how they both give forgiveness and how they receive forgiveness. And more importantly, we are focusing, Jeff and Tammy, welcome, by the way, to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast.
Thanks.
And Jeff and Tammy both support the podcast. Tammy has been on before. I'm going to link her episode in here. She was in season 2, I believe, and she talked to us about surviving breast cancer. So these are friends of mine. We went to Clearwater Christian College together back in the Stone Age, back in the 90s. And so we are Clearwater, hashtag we are Clearwater. And so welcome to the show today. But before we get started, guys, I wanted to just remind our listeners and to set up the conversation with you guys that our key verse for this season is Ephesians 4:32, where the Bible says, "Be kind one to another, tenderhearted, compassionate, forgiving one another, even as Christ has forgiven you." And so I talk a lot at this season about how this is not a suggestion. This is not a, hey, you should do this. You should think about doing this. This is a commandment. And it makes it very difficult when we have been so hurt. And so I am going to start with you, Tammy, I think, with the first question. And so this is a question that we are asking everybody. And so this is also a season. So again, especially if you're watching on YouTube, you may be able to hear it in my voice, but you'll definitely see it in my face. I don't know what these guys are going to tell me today. I know one sentence of what they're going to tell me today. I know what needed to be forgiven because I know one sentence of what we're going to talk about today. And so that allows for us to have a unfiltered, candid conversation where I can ask questions as they get literally downloaded into my brain. And so, but we are asking the same question to everybody. And so, Tammy, I'll start with you, and then we'll dive into the bulk of the podcast. But so, when you think of forgiveness, and I tell everybody, I'm not looking for the Sunday school answer. When you think of forgiveness, what does forgiveness mean to you?
Probably I would say not holding on to the old stuff and kind of letting it go. And still being kind and being able to have a relationship, might be a different type of relationship, but still be able to be okay with that other person that's hurt you.
That's really good. And I hear that from a lot of people. Most people say not holding on or releasing. And so, okay, we're going to tuck that away in a pocket for a second. Jeff, tell me what forgiveness means to you.
I would start with unforgiveness. Like if you won't forgive somebody, if you have an unforgiving spirit, I think it's what I've seen just in my own experience. It's more of a prison for the person who won't forgive than it is for the person that you think you're holding in bondage to the past. So forgiveness is really letting yourself out of that prison, of deciding I'm not going to let the behaviors of a person dictate how I feel or how I react or how I make my decisions. And like Tammy said, being able to, I think it's especially being able to walk away from the behavior, not necessarily walk away from the person. It will certainly change, whatever the trauma is, whatever the event was, certainly changes the nature of the relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean you walk away from the person.
Yeah, I love that, especially given what, like I said, the one sentence that I know that we're going to talk about today. But yeah, I think that most people, if we sit down and we think about it, we think that forgiveness is bondage, right? It is sin, unfortunately. Even though many times we have so many reasons to have aught against a human being, it is prison. It is a break in relationships. It is all of those things. And yet there are things that happen in our lives that require us because there's some things that hurt on such a deep level. And both of you know that this podcast is about trauma. And there are things that hurt us on such a deep level that sometimes we choose to stay in that prison and walk away from that person instead of doing the hard thing. And what you guys are doing here today is the hard thing. And so I want to set something up really quickly. And so listen, if you went to Clearwater Christian College, you're just a hedge above most people in this world. It's very difficult to explain, and you guys can probably agree with me. I think you would agree with me here. It's very difficult to explain the experience that was Clearwater Christian College. But there were couples around campus that we all were like, eye roll emoji if it would have existed in the 90s. Like these people are stupidly in love, and they're going to graduate and get married and have 12,000 kids, and I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. And there was Mike and Lily and Drury and Susie and Geo, and then there was Tammy and Jeff. And so whoever decides to answer this question, it doesn't matter. But for our listeners, tell us a little bit about your meeting at Clearwater Christian College, and talk to me a little bit about that season of your life, because I'm just telling you, we were all jealous. You guys were on the list of people that we were like, yep, I'm never getting married. They met their soulmate at Clearwater Christian College. So who wants to tell me the story about how you guys met at CCC?
Go ahead.
I can. No, go ahead, Jeff. You take this one.
So I first met Tammy through her brother. He was 2 doors down in the dorm. And so we had become friends. We had similar interests, similar classes. And so I'd met Tammy freshman year through that. I also actually dated one of her best friends. In our sophomore year, I'd taken a couple semesters off, and so I came back our sophomore year. And from my perspective, she may have a different perspective. We were in a very similar friend group. There's about 6 or 7 of us that would go to chapel together and go to meals together and pal around. And I do remember going to chapel. This is how I kind of started to figure this out. Going to chapel, if I was there first, the seat next to me stayed empty until she showed up. And then if I was there after her, that seat next to her was the only one that was available. So we just happened to sit together quite a bit. And then a little bit of socialization. I finally decided for the state fair came around, and I decided to ask her to the state fair, and that was our first date.
Very cool. Tammy, what do you remember?
Very similar. He went out with Tammy a few times, and then she liked his roommate, and then that worked out for us. And then a state fair, though, you need to know this guy has motion sickness, and he rode every ride with me, and he was green.
And so let's talk about that. So that was your sophomore year. Tell me a little bit, how did you ultimately end up getting married?
We started dating that semester, spent the summer apart, which almost killed us. We actually broke up after she came back from home, and then got back together again about 2 months later. And then,
I think we broke up about 3 times before we actually decided. Yeah. But he proposed, he wrote a song, and he proposed and gave me a promise ring, kind of held us over until we were a little closer to getting married.
And you guys got married after you graduated?
After I graduated, before he graduated, like in between the semesters.
Okay, gotcha. And so you get married, both of you finally graduate from college. And I don't even know if you're in the careers that you went to college for, so we won't use time on that right now. But and so you get married, life.
And then we had 6 children in 7 years, 3 months and 3 days.
Okay, this is when YouTube, I mean, I did know that you had 6 kids. I did not know that they were in 7 years. Oh my
3
word.
months and 3 days. Yes. So our youngest just turned 20 and the oldest is 27.
I mean, this is what I love about this season, because I don't know that I realized that. Holy moly. And
Yes.
so Jeff, tell me what that looked like. Like, now you're providing for 8 people. And I know, Tammy, you probably, I don't know how if you worked, I don't know how. So that might be important in this story. So you have that many children in that short of a time, and you have that many toddlers and diapers and bottles and what's the breakup? You have like, how many boys and how many girls?
4 boys, 2 girls.
4 boys, 2 girls. Okay. So 4 boys, we don't need to say anymore. So Jeff, talk to me about, so first of all, how long were you guys married before you started having children?
9 months.
Wow.
Yeah, our first child was born in September of 95. We were married in January.
Okay, so Jeff, so you guys immediately then, you don't get any time together. You 9 months together, right, without children.
Right.
Tell me, as the leader of your home, being that young, right? So you're 23, 24?
I was 22. He was 21.
Okay, so on this end of the other side of 40, we can all look back at that and go, wow.
Out of our,
having that many children, at that young of an age, or at least even starting to have children at that young of age. So Jeff, I'm building up to what happened, because I want all of us to see if we can see some warning signs or whatever. And then we're going to talk about what happened. And then, more importantly, we're going to talk about the forgiveness aspect of it. So Jeff, from your perspective, right out of the gate, 9 months after you get married, you have your first child. And then every year after that, you're having another child. As the provider of the home, as the husband, can you talk to us a little bit about what life was like for you? Because Tammy is taken care of, by child 6, she's full on mom. What's life like for you?
So I graduated with a degree in education, to be a teacher. And so I was able to find a job, we moved back to where I grew up, for me to teach. After about 3 years of that, there's no way it was going to keep up with our housing, with our living expenses. So by then we had 3 kids. We had a house, small house. Decided I had to leave, what I was doing, and I got a job with doing some technical work, paid the bills, did pretty well. Then decided I could probably do better if I went out on my own. So I started a small business of my own to try to keep taking care of, you've got to keep, the mindset is I've got to keep accumulating more revenue. I've got to get more money. These kids are going to need more resources. They're going to need, so every year I realized I need to increase my ability to make money. So.
Yeah. So I can imagine, and that's the reason why I asked that question, because I can imagine the stress on both of you, with you having to work. How many hours a week would you say you were working?
By the time I started the company, it was, there were some pretty long weeks where, if you're running your own company, I had one business partner, and when something went wrong, we had to be there to fix it. So there was
Right.
There was a couple of weeks we had some really late nights having to deal with issues and such.
So Tammy, how do you remember those times when he's at work and you're at home? Let's say you've had all the kids now, right? So now you're full on, you have all of them. He's at work
So
doing his thing.
I stayed home with them, and I also babysat to try to help make ends meet. But I felt like that I pretty much did everything. And when he came home, he just wanted to go game, or he just wanted to go whatever. And I remember many times asking, hey, the kids and I are going to go this, or whatever. And he would reply with, he would be sitting in front of his computer with video games saying, I'm not interested. That's what's in my head. That's what I remember.
And so is that one of the first warning signs, if you will, that you remember that you guys were headed for some trouble? Do either of you remember? Was it a slow fade? I love that song by Casting Crowns, where we just kind of give up a little bit of land, you know. And so in that situation, Tammy, that you just referenced, giving up a little bit of real estate of spending time with the family, giving up a little bit of real estate. Jeff and I, you know, Jeff knows I'm not going to pull punches, and neither is he, but not doing not being the leader of that home, even though you were working your tail off and you just wanted 5 minutes, 10 minutes to play video games. I can see where there would be, and Tammy, correct me if I'm wrong, some bitterness and resentment. Like, I'm here all day with these kids and I don't have an adult conversation. He is working all day and then he comes back and and is playing video games. I can see where that could be the beginning of a slow fade of the degradation of a relationship. Can you guys look back and see that as a point of contention at all?
Sure. I'd gotten to a point where I was like, this is not my life. This is not the life I signed up for. This is not the life I want to live. I mean, the features of the life were okay, but a lot of it, and I know there's a lot of guys out there that can associate that you needed an escape. Like, this is not what I intended. This is not what I had mapped out. The problem is, we get so wrapped up in, in our younger years, how this is how I think things are going to play out. And then we get so attached to that plan, that blueprint. And when it doesn't go through, then we just eject, we lose it. I mean, we lose our grip. So that's where I went. And I have very clear recollections of all of the warnings. I still hear in my head the things that Tammy had said about, the kids are growing up and you're missing out on some things, and that she's tired of looking at the back of my head. And, I know them clearly. And it was, I don't know why I could not break myself out of that and just engage with the life that was in front of me instead of the one that I was missing out on.
And I think that's where a lot of marriages get in trouble is, especially our generation, right? So there's this big buildup, because both of you grew up in Christian homes, right? Tammy, I know you did. Did you, Jeff? And so, I think that for us, our generation, so I'm a little bit older than both of you guys, not much, obviously graduated a year apart. But yeah, there was this life that we scripted, like we drew up the game plan. I'm going to wait until I get married to do certain things. And some of us did that and some of us didn't, but that's neither here nor there. I do think that when you get married that young, and you begin having kids that young, and you begin a career that young, and you go to a Christian college. And Tammy, what was your degree in? Psychology. And so needing more education, probably even after the kids got out of the house, to make a living with that degree. As much as I love psychology, we all know this, right? And so the pressures of that, and Jeff, you couldn't have said it any better when you said, it wasn't the way I drew it up, right? So we all were like taught, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to have a happy marriage. And if you stay in church and stay on your knees and stay in the word, your marriage is going to be fine, and all the things. And then life happens. And I can't imagine the pressures on both of your ends of having children. Like I have a dog that I barely can keep alive. And so having, that many kids in that short of a time, that little, needing to keep them alive, needing to keep them provided for, is a lot of pressure. And suddenly I think married couples, and I've been married, and even though it was a domestic violence marriage, there were some normal things to it. You begin to grow apart. And when you begin to grow apart, that is when we get in trouble. Can either of you pinpoint a time when, when you look back, it was like, there was our marriage before this and after this? And so I'll throw the question out there. Do you remember one of the first warning signs that you guys were headed for what you are right now, is divorced? And not the big thing that we're going to talk about, but were there little things that you guys could identify that might help young Christian couples out there listening to this podcast right now maybe not suffer some of the things that you guys did as a young married couple? Can you think of some warning signs besides the one that we just talked about, where Jeff worked and then wasn't present, that would be advantageous to people listening?
There was one moment for me where we were down at her brother's place, spending time with his family, and there had been a few things that had happened in a very short period of time previous to that. So we were just kind of spending a Saturday down there. We went shopping, went to the Sawgrass Mall, and I felt completely unplugged, disconnected from them, from Tammy and everybody else. Like I just did not matter. I was baggage. And I communicated that to Tammy that night. I was actually, I guess I'm not too proud to mention, I was actually in tears, feeling like I knew that there were at least 6 other people in front of me on Tammy's priority list. Not too arrogant in my own head to acknowledge I was causing this problem. I was driving her away. I was putting distance between us, but I felt the giant gap that had kind of opened up between us. Communicated that to her, and honestly, in retrospect, I don't have too much clarity on if that made a difference. But I knew I didn't change my behavior, so obviously it's not going to, her heart's not going to change. So,
how about you, Tim?
It was that experience for me.
I actually recall that situation very clearly. But at the time, I believe we only had 3 children.
Yes.
And I very strongly feel like the 4th one was conceived that night. Because we did have a long talk, and we did work through, I thought, a lot of it.
And so life just kind of beat you guys up, is the net of that. And so
life to a certain extent, but I was not a good person, just not a good human being, full of myself, super arrogant, thought I could handle anything, thought I could solve any problem and conquer any challenge, not close to God, not chasing after him, not a real relationship. Like I said, I was raised in a Christian home, went to a Christian school, went to a Christian college, went to a Baptist church all my life. Never had any kind of real deep connection with God. Never had a good daily relationship. Never spent a ton of time in Scripture. God built my brain with the ability to just kind of store a lot of information. So I know a lot about the Bible, but I did not have a meaningful relationship with Jesus Christ throughout that entire period. And I easily chalked that up to the number one problem in my life. I loved myself more than anybody. I loved myself more than Tammy. I loved myself more than the kids. I loved myself more than God. And I still consider that to be the source of all of our failures. So even, I know that Tammy has a very clear list of my failures that continue to break her heart, continue to pop up in her head from time to time. And I know that the source of almost every one of those things is just because I love myself more than I loved anybody else.
Tammy, how's it make you feel to hear him say some of those things? And I'm sure he said them before to you, but how does it make you feel in this moment?
I always felt like I was blindsided by all of it because I thought we came from the same background and had the same goals and the same training and all of that. And so when I found out that none of it was true, it was hard to take.
Would you use the word devastating?
Very much. Sucker punch to the gut, perhaps.
Yeah. Blindsided. There's nothing worse than being blindsided, that is for sure. And again, those of you who are watching on YouTube, you're just kind of getting the real here. It is 9:00 on a Thursday night, and probably none of us will sleep tonight. And that's okay, because the mission here is so, so important. And so let's fast forward to the reason why you're no longer married. And Jeff, I'm going to let you share with listeners, and then we'll follow up with Tammy. What happened? Why aren't you married anymore?
Well, I started an adulterous relationship with a woman in our church in 1999, and then Tammy finally learned about it in 2003, and the world came crashing down around us. Switched churches. She's told me several times, really the only reason why the marriage did end right then was because of the kids. She didn't want to have to try to raise 6 kids by herself, and so the kids kind of saved the marriage up to that point, up to a few years ago. So tried, thought we were on the track to put things together, moved away so she could get her degree, her master's degree. Met some really great guys that poured a lot of truth into me, helped me start to grow, helped me start to mature, helped me start to kind of figure out my relationship with God, figure out who I was, who God intended me to be. Still, a lot of that, old Jeff was still lingering. Still had several failures even after that, of just not being very thoughtful of Tammy and her feelings at some critical moments, and then throughout the kind of the last several years before she asked for the divorce, I just kind of had this foreboding, this sense that as soon as the kids are gone, she's gone. She's not going to put up with me anymore. And the only thing I had left was in my head was, if I make myself as valuable to her as I can, if I make it, I try to make her life as good as I can, that she'll think that her life is better with me than without me. Maybe we've got some hope. And I was a dummy for not pouring myself into Jesus Christ and saying, I can't fix this. You're the only one that can fix this. And I did not at that. I wasn't thinking through surrendering, yielding who I was and who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go and what my plans were. By that, by that period before she asked for the divorce, I was climbing, a very significant ladder within education technology at the local independent Christian school, in the community, in independent business. I was becoming somebody, and then she asked for the divorce. I was so stunned. I don't know why I was, and she told me she thought I'd be relieved. I was stunned. I really thought we were going somewhere, that we were making some progress. But in retrospect, God has so radically adjusted my perspective of things that I realized I hadn't just laid it all out for God to take care of. It was just, life was brokenness. There was wreckage all over the place. And I wasn't paying attention to who could fix it, because I thought, I can push this stuff to the side. I can make a way. I can make all this work. And it was all about me. I'm going to take care of this. And I wasn't chasing after Jesus. I wasn't pouring myself into him and crying out to him. And he had to take everything away from me. In a 6-month period, lost my wife, lost my job, lost my car, lost my house, living in a good friend's converted garage bedroom, tiny little closet of a space. My kids gone, living with her, and so I got to a place of just tremendous brokenness where God had to basically take everything away from me for me to realize I really can't handle this on my own. I really need my Savior to be the centerpiece of my life. So I continue to look back, and anybody listening to this, please understand, probably the root of most of your problems is Jesus isn't the centerpiece of your life. And until he is, everything's going to be a little bit of a mess. Nothing's going to really work right. If you're a believer, Jesus Christ has to be the centerpiece.
It's so true. And as you both know, as listeners to this podcast, that we refer to Jesus as the star of the story. Because, in my own story, it's, I can look back at times and decisions I made to try to make things better and to try to make the trauma go away and all of those things. But it was only Jesus that redeemed, and it's continuing to redeem all of that stuff. Jeff, being on the other side of being in Tammy's seat for 12 years, and it was the same thing, Tammy. It was like, I knew that this wasn't a good man because he was hitting me on the regular. But I don't know why I was so shocked when I found out that he had been sleeping with lots of people for lots of years. And Jeff, not to rub salt in the wound, it's just a special kind of betrayal. And it takes the star of the story to bind up those wounds, to collect those tears, and to give me, I can't speak for Tammy, we're going to ask her in a minute, but to give me, I remember laying in bed, and I've said this on this podcast a million times, in my own marriage that was abusive. And he was also having an extramarital affair that I didn't know about, but the abuse was bad enough. And I remember laying in bed because he would always abuse me when he drank. And he would drink about 2 times a week. And when I say drink, I mean like a liter of Crown drink, not a couple drinks, like drink to get drunk. And it was bad for Amy after that. And I remember laying in bed, not knowing about the extramarital affairs, not knowing about that special kind of betrayal. And I wish I could explain to listeners out there, particularly men. Women are going to know what I'm talking about. It's just a different type of betrayal. It's a different type of pain. It takes a lot more to come back from that. I was way more hurt after I found out that he had extramarital affairs than I ever was with his punches, his knockdowns, his all the things. That hurt more than anything. But I remember laying in bed, not knowing about the extramarital affairs, saying, surely, Lord, we have gotten to 490 times that he has done this by now. When do I get a free pass on having to forgive him? Because you clearly aren't going to change this story. And so, Tammy, knowing that and sitting across this Zoom meeting from you and seeing the pain that's on your face this many years after, I feel it in my heart too. So as much as you're comfortable, we would love to know your perspective on this. And you're sitting on a podcast with me and with Jeff. Clearly you have found your way to forgiveness. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's over. I'm not saying it doesn't still hurt. But we would love your perspective on walking through this, keeping in mind that there are copious amounts of women on the other side with earbuds in right now, listening to this. And that's not to pressure you. That is just to ask you for the most vulnerable advice you can give us through your own story. So you find out, you can tell us how you found out. You can tell us whatever you want, but I'm interested in your perspective on this period in your marriage.
So, actually, sometimes when we pray and ask for things, we get more than we bargain for. And I had just had my 6th child maybe 3 months. He was maybe 3 months old, and I was going to visit my brother. They had a newborn that was near death. And I was going to the hospital just to kind of encourage my sister-in-law. And I prayed the whole way there and the whole way back that God would find a way for me to show Jeff that I loved him. And the day after, maybe 2 days, just a couple days after, I needed some email that I couldn't find on the computer. And I had called Jeff at work and had asked him how to, I just couldn't find it. And somehow in like sent emails or deleted emails or something, I found the conversations between him and the mother of his extra child. After I took a minute and realized what was happening, I just called him and told him to come home. I was like, you have to come home right now. And then I hung up the phone. And that was kind of, and he started off not telling the truth, like trying to minimize all of it and not admitting. And eventually, like as days passed and weeks, like it all kind of came spewing out, and she would call me and try to make excuses for why things happened. And she called me to tell me that that was his kid, and just kept calling and calling. And it was a lot. It was a lot to take. We all went to the same church. Her father was our pastor, so I didn't feel like I could go to the pastor for help. I felt alone. So eventually we switched churches, and we talked to that pastor, and he just gave us as much guidance as he possibly could. But we also had a really long conversation, and I remember saying to him, like, you've got 17 years to change my mind, because I had a newborn and I didn't want my children to grow up in a broken home. And then we also decided that a bachelor's degree in psychology was not going to provide for 6 children, and I needed to get my master's. So we didn't stay very long in the area until we moved away so that I could get my master's degree. So then not only I was just not dealing with all of what I knew, but I was focused on survival. I had to make sure those kids grew up not in a broken home. I had to get a master's degree so that I could provide for them should he do something else like this. And then the finances weren't there. So then I had to work. I worked I felt like I could never stop. So I worked 2 part-time jobs to get my master's degree, raising kids. And I just felt like I was survival mode the whole way. When we got to the school that I switched to get my master's degree, the pastor that we had been at when we switched churches called the school and told them, make sure they're okay, to make sure they're not just running away from whatever. And a couple of my professors questioned me a couple of times. We talked for a little bit. I was like, no, we're good, because I didn't want to deal with it. And I did it. And they believed me, because I had put on a face this whole, I could get through it. And I did. And I got the master's degree. The kids survived. And then one day I was just like, why am I still here? I felt like he didn't love me. He didn't stick around for me. He stuck around because he had to. And one day I was just like, you know what? I'm all done. And he was shocked. And the kids were shocked. Everybody was shocked. Everybody thought we had it all together. We were teaching classes in the church and running groups, and a couple at church that everybody looked up to. And we didn't have it together at all.
So how many years elapsed between when you found out about the extramarital affair and when you asked for the divorce?
15.
About 16.
How many?
15
I think
years.
it was Oh,
50s.
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. So much to unpack there. First of all, I did not know about the extra child. So that brings a whole new level of complexity into it. But Tammy, your response to it, and this is what I meant. And when I talked before we prayed before the interview, this is when I drop into some mode that I don't even recognize who I am. But your response to it is so typical of our generation, number one, particularly raised in a Christian home, because being divorced is, oh my God, you're going to hell if you get divorced. We don't do that no matter what. And so I just want to affirm, which is just a very woo-woo word. I can't think of another one at 9:30 at night, but the fact that you just kind of put your head down, and that's exactly what I did. People ask me all the time, how were you in an abusive marriage for 12 years? How did you put up with that for 12 years? And I will tell you, listeners out there, and I think Tammy will agree, when you're going through that kind of betrayal, when you're going through that kind of pain, and you also have to keep yourself alive, and in your case had to keep 6 children alive, there is this place that you go that you don't feel anything, you don't process anything, you just put your head down and you just do the thing. And then, sounds very similar to what happened to me, is one day it doesn't sound like Jeff had any more indiscretions after that, but John had hit me one time. He put a gun to my head one night. And after 12 years of all of that, I was done. And it wasn't that I didn't forgive him. It was just, I knew that I had a choice at that point, that I was either going to die in that marriage and die on the hill of, I'm never getting divorced because divorce is not biblical, or I am going to, for one time in my life, pick me and deal with this. And so I just want to say to you that it's admirable that you did that. I think your kids are probably better for it. I think, though, that you are now in this season of your life feeling those 15 years. And so I think my question to you is, in that period of 15 years, did you make a transaction of forgiveness with Jeff? Like a true transaction?
Here I am, you can see that I'm nowhere near where I want to be, but you